Welcome to episode 61 of the Active Bariatric Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Tirapelli, bariatric sports dietitian. Today, I'm so excited to have on my colleague, Kayla Girgen. Kayla is a registered dietitian and certified personal trainer who helps women stop dieting and develop healthy habits for life. With technology like continued glucose monitoring, Kayla shows women how to balance their blood sugar and maximize their tool for sustainable success after bariatric surgery. Thank you so much for being here today, Kayla. I'm so excited to have you.
Yes, that you're like one of my favorite colleagues out there in the bariatric nutrition space. So I'm honored.
Same.
Thank you.
Oh, I love it. And I've, on this podcast, I've had other bariatric dietitians just because I think it's important for folks to know that even within like the bariatric field of nutrition, there are some specialty areas that, depending upon your goals and what you're working on and where you are in your journey, I think it's so helpful to show people that there's lots of options out there in terms of people that can help you, especially dietitians. So I want to highlight you and what you do today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Well, tell us a little bit more so folks know, how did you, how you became a dietitian, but also how you got into this kind of specialty area of bariatric nutrition.
Yeah, I'll try to give you the short version because I feel like this could go a couple different ways. But
I hear you.
I had no idea what I wanted to do. So straight out of high school, I went to the University of Minnesota, Duluth, and I was pre-pharmacy. So I had my first run-in with college chemistry classes, and that was like a rude awakening since high school. It was all burning things on Bunsen burners and watching movies. So to get like an actual, chemistry curriculum was a little bit shocking for somebody who usually got good grades like myself. So on top of that, I didn't know what I was good at. I think I ended up changing my major from pre-pharmacy to psychology to business and maybe something else in there. So I actually, after my first year of college, I just kind of walked away. I got swirled up into like corporate life for a little bit. And it wasn't until like 5 years later that I came back and discovered what a dietitian was. And I was like, I felt it in my bones. I was like, okay, that's really what I want to do. So as you know, too, they like run you through all these different specialty areas. And I really enjoyed my work outside the hospital. So I think for, maybe anyone listening, dietitians go through almost like a residency. So you get like all of these different specialty areas, you get exposed to everything. And I was like, hospital's not really for me. So after I eventually graduated, passed my exam, I ended up working in weight management. So I was at a retail clinic. And then once my husband and I moved, I actually went to like a medical weight management clinic that had bariatric surgery housed there too. So we did anything from medical, like meal replacement plans, all the way to bariatric surgery. And then I was like, okay, now I really feel it in my bones. Like these are people I love to work with. And I think there's just so much, like everyone's so eager. It's such a, I think, it's a very enduring process. There's a lot to do and it's definitely not the easy way. So I think that, I found myself and my schedule filling up with a lot of bariatric surgery patients, and just to see all of the like wide-eyed excitedness, but then also like a lot of, just an emotional roller coaster, like being scared. It's a big decision and there's a lot of information out there. So I think helping patients kind of navigate that was really what I love doing, kind of that bridge between the psychology of, why we eat and what we eat, and then the physiology and anatomy changes that come with bariatric surgery. So it was really interesting to see that interplay. Yeah. And then I think being in the clinic, I don't know if you've worked in a clinic too before, but you kind of are restricted a little bit in some of those things that you can say. So you have certain protocols, or, you're kind of thinking through your to-do list when you're working with patients, and it's not necessarily all about them. So eventually I left and started my own practice. So I've been doing that for about 2 years now. So working remotely, and it's just amazing all the fun friends that you get to meet, thanks to the internet.
I totally agree with you. I was the same. So I worked, so my last position, so I've been a dietitian for 17 years, and my last position of almost 10 years was in a bariatric surgical center. And so I was the outpatient dietitian where I worked with folks pre and post. And I felt the same way, Kayla, like I felt like there was so much more we could do. But when you're in a clinic setting, which by the way, you have to have dietitians in the clinic setting because folks have to come through and learn what's nutrition going to be like. But in my case too, I felt like, gosh, and I had that interest in sports nutrition side. And I just felt like there was so much more we could focus on and have that longer term relationship where we can work through different phases of different goals, and I did the same thing where I was just like, you know what, I'm going to go off on my own and open my business too, because I felt like there was just so much more we could do, and I love meeting folks too on the internet. And it's been, I obviously COVID was not a great thing, but the being able to do things now online has really been such a major, change in the healthcare system. And so I think that's been a positive of it, is that there's so many more folks now we can help, around the country, around the world, even, with nutrition, especially after bariatric surgery. So I'm with you on that. I hear you. And can I ask, so you also utilize continuous glucose monitoring with your clients. So can you tell us a little bit about what is CGM? We're going to call it CGM the rest of the time, so we don't have to keep saying that. But tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so CGM, for anyone that's never heard of it before, basically it involves wearing a little sensor on the back of your arm. So if you've seen like maybe kind of patches or stickers on the back of folks' arms, and that is really kind of monitoring your blood sugar, or it actually kind of extrapolates like from your blood sugar numbers between, or your kind of fluid between your cells. It's not a true blood sugar reading. So it's a really great workaround for anyone that's maybe done like, finger pricks or things like that in the past. You're not having to poke your finger every 5 minutes. So, you have the device on the back of your arm. It transmits to your phone your blood sugar readings. And what's really helpful is you can see how you react to certain food, exercise. I think one thing that's been really interesting for a lot of folks is seeing the impact of stress and sleep. So I feel like those aren't always things that you can see. For anyone listening, I'm air quoting right now.
Yeah.
So you can't really see those things. So it makes it hard, I think, to intervene, or when like, oh, I got a crappy night's sleep. But, once you really see that data and you're like, wow, I slept, really bad. My, blood sugar is up. I'm more snacky. When you have feedback like that, I think it makes it a little bit easier. I will say stress is another one too, but I will say that with a lot of folks that maybe even struggle with emotional eating, I feel like it really helps discover like, what are those worth it foods? If you, can make those connections when you're like, okay, I eat X and I feel like crap. What can we do to either modify that? Not saying we eliminate it altogether, but maybe we change the order, or we go for a walk after you eat to help balance your blood sugar. I think it really helps to show people that they can have some of these foods that maybe they thought they'd never have again after bariatric surgery, incorporate them in a way where you feel in control and you're not, going off the rails. But then you also have good accountability. So I can see all of my clients' data on my end. So it really doubles as a good accountability tool just to help people kind of get going there.
I love that. I find that so interesting. And what an age that we live in, that we can get so much cool information, that, couple, maybe 10, 20 years ago, we didn't have access to this type of stuff at your fingertips, you know what I mean?
Right.
And going right to your phone and giving you feedback. So who do you think would benefit from, I would assume everyone might benefit, but are there particular folks that you feel would benefit from utilizing CGM for data? And maybe tell us a little bit about how you use it with your clients.
Yeah. Maybe I'm a little biased, but I think everyone can benefit, just because I think it's so helpful. Again, like when you can connect the, what you eat to how you feel. I think sometimes we're just so busy and caught up that we lose our senses in that way. But I would say, especially like thinking about bariatric surgery, one of the complications that I see a lot is things like reactive hypoglycemia. Maybe some people that aren't sleeping very good. So I see a lot of times where maybe they're having troubles falling asleep, or doing the, 3 or 4 o'clock a.m. wake up and I can't fall back asleep. Sometimes I've noticed people will kind of bottom out in the middle of the night. So we can tweak what they're eating in the evening to help get them more steady levels. So they end up sleeping better, they snack less, you have more energy. So that way you can do things like workout. So I feel like it's kind of this, it helps put that big picture together. But I would say, again, with like reactive hypoglycemia, if you have something like, maybe if you feel sweaty or fainty or shaky, those are really scary symptoms.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times we're using, highly processed foods or high sugar things to kind of correct for that. So you get in this like blood sugar roller coaster. So that has been really helpful, especially with those folks. Or, I see a lot of overlap with like women who have PCOS and who've had bariatric surgery and kind of hitting that insulin resistance head on. There's certain trends that we can look at. We can leverage things like exercise, whether it's low intensity or high intensity, to really kind of even them out too.
Yeah. Gosh, I love that. No, I think those are all good points. And certainly that sounds like a very helpful tool. I know I've had folks that, especially with, the people that I work with that are, having activity and nutrition goals. Yeah. Blood sugar issues, especially with my Roux-en-Y patients. If they, for example, they skip a meal and then they're going to go out for a workout, we all of a sudden find that, maybe a little while into their workout, their blood sugar is too low because they didn't eat, they just had something with carbohydrate, or they haven't eaten in a long period of time and their blood sugar reacts, where it drops real low. And I feel like that would be so helpful in terms of having that data at your fingertips to go, look, this is what's happening. Here's how we can fix it nutritionally. Make sure, and then let me ask you, what are some of the things that you tell your folks when that happens?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing when it comes to things like hypoglycemia, for example. So what that means, for anyone listening, you get that really low blood sugar. And again, you get some of those scary symptoms. And then we tend to correct with something like, again, candy. So you're kind of getting this ebb and flow. But I would say prevention is always the greatest measure. So trying not to, like, one strategy I teach is like cushioning your carbs. So, maybe it's just having your carbohydrates with something like a protein or a healthy fat source, some fiber. Those things can help prevent that from happening in the first place. So I would say prevention whenever possible. And a lot of that is like with food pairing, I would say.
Yeah, I love that. I use that strategy too. I think that's really smart. And especially for folks that seem to be more reactive. And if they do have activity goals and things like that, you want to make sure that you have adequate energy levels to sustain you throughout your workout. So,
but I think in your case too, it's, you're working with like a lot of products like gels and things like that, where it's like, okay, how is this going to react, especially with gastric bypass or things like that. So it's helpful to see, is something like this causing that or, vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, I would love to have some folks utilize that and trial different gels and goos that are out there. So for example, some of the products that I have found that have worked well for my endurance athletes, number one being the UCAN, for someone that's more sensitive to the gels and the goos that are just simple sugars or, one sugar source, for example, versus a mixture. I have found that UCAN, which is a cornstarch, so it's hydrolyzed cornstarch, it basically impacts the blood sugar at a much slower rate, so we don't see the big jumps and drops. Also, Huma, which uses pureed chia seed and fruit puree, that has seemed to be better for my Roux-en-Y patients as well in terms of having more sustained energy level. And then just, of course, strategizing around the workouts and maybe having something a little bit more balanced prior to the run. What have you ever trialed any of those types of things with your clients?
I haven't. So I've done a few protein bar runs. I think I have a few up on my Instagram profile where I can't remember how many protein bars I've trialed now. It's probably over 20, but just to see my blood sugar response to that has been really interesting, but I haven't done endurance products. So it's just nice to know that there's options like that out there, because I feel like that's really something that's evolved too. We never saw like goo packets with chia in them before.
Yes, right. No, absolutely. And I have people that just can't do them. It's just not happening. And, they can't tolerate the taste, the consistency, the texture of those types of products. For some folks that have had surgery, it's just a no-go. And so we have to go to foods. And again, it would be interesting for, I think, good feedback for people to be able to see what happens to my blood sugar when I'm running and I'm having pretzels or fruit snacks or whatever, and coinciding with their energy levels. I think that would be really interesting.
Mm-hmm. And I would say too, like kind of piggybacking on that, I would say CGM isn't something that you do forever. I think most people get they get the most benefit, I would say, out of their first 2 or 3 sensors. And then from there, we can kind of tweak and adapt and work on, kind of whatever that big picture, if it's stress or sleep, nutrition. But I think experimenting, like usually we always have a purpose, like going in, it's like, what do you want to get out of this sensor? Are we kind of diving into afternoon slumps? Are we getting into why you're not sleeping at night? Are we going to experiment with like, new snacks and stuff? So I think just realizing too, it's not like you have this device that's on your arm forever. It's like usually they last 2 weeks and you're probably going to get your most insights that first month or 2.
Makes sense. Okay. And so something that I'm just curious about, is it covered by insurance for most folks or no?
Good question. What I find is that usually people who have been diagnosed with diabetes will have some coverage, or if you have documented things like hypoglycemia or reactive hypoglycemia, I have seen some. It all depends on insurance coverage, unfortunately. However, just as like recently as this summer now, there's some over-the-counter options. So for, anywhere from $50 to $100, you can get sensors. I will say I'm testing them now, and the manufacturer apps have a long ways to go. So I think there's some improvements software-wise. It's not really helpful, like how you get all this information and you don't know how to interpret it or what to do with it. So I think that's where really I want to help my people out is, what do we do with this information or kind of blunt some of those spikes? But now we do have kind of less expensive options. So hopefully we can just see that software and like the, education component come up a little bit more.
Keep getting better. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cause I think it's a helpful tool. And I think having a registered dietitian who then can interpret the data and give feedback and some guidelines on nutrition specifically, or exercise too, makes it all come together and makes it more effective, and then people feel like, okay, I'm actually getting something out of the tool. And I like that you said that too, that it's not meant to be like lifelong, because I think, and tell me what your thoughts are on this. I get a lot of folks that are just it's like data overload in some cases. Like, I'm going to get my body composition tested like every few weeks. And it's like, well, your body composition changes are going to take time. Like it's not going to just be overnight, and I sometimes feel like there's so much data coming in and it's almost like, okay, now what do I do with all this data if you don't really know how to utilize it or interpret it? And it's like, do I have to do this forever? You know what I mean? It's like a food log. Do I have to do a food log every day for life? No, you don't. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. And I see two camps of people. So I can probably group my folks into two. There's one where it's like, okay, I've had enough. Now it's causing more stress because, I've found out those foods that, are worth it. I know I might feel like crap afterwards, but I'm okay with that. And we kind of know how we can buffer that as much as possible. And then I see the other people who are like, I want to get more sensors because I just like that there's that accountability component. So I see more of my short termers and then I see more like long termers where they're just like, I just like to know it's kind of having it on keeps me in the guardrails. I had like one of my clients call it, she's like, I've got my governor on, it's kind of keeping me within range and just like having that insight and intuition, I think helps. But yeah, I think there's definitely a thing is like information overload because you have to find that balance where it's like, you've got this great insight, but how do we apply that and like really get max benefit without like freaking out over food too much?
Yeah. And yeah, having making it like a bad relationship, where it's like, exactly. Oh, now I can't ever eat this because this monitor said this. And it's like, no, this is just data. I know I say that a lot too with food logs. Cause I will ask my folks when they first start, like, let's track your intake just for a little bit. So I get an idea of what you're eating, when, how much, so that we know how to fuel your workouts better. And same thing. I get folks I have some people that want to log every day and it's something that they feel good about because it gives them feedback that they utilize, and then there's some folks that are like, I'm only going to do this for a week. And then I'd just rather, be more about, following a plate method or whatever works for you. And I think really ultimately you just have to find what works best for you.
Mm-hmm. And I will say too, it's not like the goal isn't to flatline your blood sugar. So when you're getting kind of these rolling hills or mountain peaks, that's totally normal. And I think just like using macro goals, it's like, you're not going to hit them to a T every single day. You're going to have those days where you're out of range. It's like, what are you doing on average? Like, what are those averages looking like?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So let's talk too now about rucking. This is an area of expertise for you too. And tell us a little bit about, so when I say the word rucking, like what does that mean? Tell everyone listening, what is rucking? Because I think for some folks, they may have never heard of it.
Right. And I even like go to spell it on my phone and my autocorrect still hasn't it's always trucking or, other
something
things.
else.
But
yeah.
That's my second favorite thing. Maybe first favorite thing to talk about is rucking. But yes, rucking is essentially just walking with a weighted pack. So imagine like you're walking with a backpack, maybe it's got some weight in it. And really, I especially love it for the bariatric population because it's low impact. So it's easy on your joints. It's a good way to help preserve some of that muscle and bone density. So just carrying some extra weight can help with that stimulus on your bones. So, yes, I know calcium supplements are touted, but I think you also need that stimulus just to, keep your good, strong bones, because as you lose weight and some of that weight comes off your frame, we do see a lot of trends where bone density is going down. So we want to see that preserved. Same with muscle, as you know, I know that's a big area of expertise for you. But I think too, it's like a lot of people like to walk, but they feel like it's not enough. So it helps like get your cardiovascular system going. It's kind of a good mix between strength and endurance training.
I love it. And so when you're working with someone, first off, like what kind of what do they put in their backpacks? Like what kind of weight can you add? I mean, I assume you could put anything in there, but are there particular products out there that you can buy, particular bags and things like that?
Yeah, I would say starting out. So just for an example, I took like an old backpack. A lot of them have like that laptop sleeve in them. So I basically rolled up like a 10-pound dumbbell in a towel, threw it in my backpack. And then once I proved to myself that I was kind of rucking enough and I wanted, more comfortable equipment and not a dumbbell poking me in the back, right. Then I kind of invested in some cast iron weight plates. You can get them. They almost look like, they're just like little like weight plates that you can slip right in your backpack. And those are definitely a lot more comfortable, but you could use textbooks, you could use water bottles, really anything that's kind of heavy, and maybe kind of padding that with towels or bubble wrap or something, just so it's not sliding around, but you can use any old backpack and weights to start. So really you could ruck for free with equipment you already have. And then, as you prove to yourself that you do more. My personal favorite is now I have a ruck plate carrier. So when we're just walking around the neighborhood, it just holds a weight plate. And, even the neighbor stopped me this morning and he was like, "Oh yeah, where's your backpack? Oh yeah, I see you got your backpack on." So
what are you carrying in there? It's like, what are these things look
like? Yeah, they know it now. Like at first I feel like our neighbors are like, "What are you doing? What are you training for?" And it's just like, training for life. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I totally agree with you with, it increases, it does help with increasing like kind of the intensity level of the of a walk, I guess you could say, because you're adding in, weight. And like you said, it stimulates that cardiovascular and strength as well. And for someone that's just starting then, like, when you are talking with someone that's like, "Hey, I want to start rucking," like, where do they start? Like, what would you advise in terms of distance or weight that they're carrying in their backpacks?
Yeah, I would first look at like what you're doing for step count now. So you don't want to just be, sedentary 100% of the day and then throw a backpack with weight on. I think you really put yourself at risk for injury. So I think number one, it's just trying to prevent injury. You don't want to go one step forward, two steps back. So I think even just slowly getting those walking mechanics, if you haven't, maybe it starts with a step goal. And when you're consistently hitting that, then maybe you're trying to add 5 or 10 pounds is usually a pretty good starting weight for most people. Okay. And, again, you could probably hit that with some textbooks and just a regular backpack, and then maybe upgrade to plates if you want to. But that's the beauty of it, is you can really kind of scale up weight. You can play with elevation, you can play with distance, but I always caution, like, don't let your ego get in it, because I know everybody wants to load up a backpack and just go. And then you're going to be like, okay, my hip flexors hurt, my feet hurt. Like I noticed like footwear was huge for me too. So I had to use something like a hiking boot just to, have a little bit more kind of firmness, and the squishy shoes just kind of left my feet hurting. But you can really kind of play with a few different levers to help get that going. But I'm actually writing a book on rucking. So
so excited. Yes, is there anything you can share about it to the listeners so we know it's,
Well, I have a deadline of January 1st, but I'm learning that, publishing moves really slow. So it's like, okay, we want your book January 1. Maybe we'll see it the following year. And it's just like, so it might be a little bit, but yes, I won't stop sharing about rucking because I think it's something everybody's going to try at least once.
Yeah. I mean, and what's so great about, for folks that have had bariatric surgery is that after the surgery, they're looking for things that they, enjoy and that they're going to be able to do for life, and based on what I've heard from you, but also others that I've heard in the community talking about rucking, it sounds like it's kind of gaining some steam. Would you agree? Is there a pretty good community for rucking?
Oh yeah. And I see it now too. I'll be walking and I was like, oh, they're rucking. I can see they have a backpack on or something.
Yeah.
So yes, I think there's just so many benefits to it. And if you're walking and if you can get a little bit more, bang for your buck really on that, there's just so many benefits. Like I mentioned, the strength, the bone, but even posture, like we're all hunched over computers now. But I would say what I really like too is it just gets you outside. So it's like gets you enjoying some of that outdoor time. And I think when you can couple, exercise with being outside, we really see a lot of those benefits of like green exercise, helping with both physical and mental health too. So that's personally what got me. I was like, I like the challenge of it. But then I also just like that, hey, I'm kind of getting out of my head, getting outside and still getting a good workout in. That's not leaving like my knees or my hips or anything really cranky either. So.
Right. Oh, I love it. And so let's talk about being dietitians. Let's talk a little bit about fueling around rucking. So, a typical, rucking session might be 30 minutes, 45 minutes. I mean, just, going for a duration of a walk, whatever that person is wanting to do. What types of nutrition advice do you give to your folks that are going to start implementing rucking?
Yeah, usually if it's under an hour and it's kind of, like you said, 30, 45 minutes, I'm not too concerned about changing too much. My biggest concern usually is, are you hitting your protein goals over the span of the day, which I feel like is almost for anyone rucking or not, like, that protein becomes paramount just to like hold on to muscle. Or, one thing I think it's underestimated too for like bone development, you need good protein for that too. So I think really looking at protein over the span of the day. If somebody's going out, maybe it's hot. I feel like electrolytes are another big one too. So making sure you're like staying well hydrated, because I think that, a lot of us are chronically dehydrated. And sometimes that gets challenging after bariatric surgery because you're like, oh, I ate, so I can't drink now. And you're, you have that whole puzzle piece that fits into the equation too. So I would say protein, electrolytes. Once you start going for longer, rucks or maybe something more, maybe it's a lot of elevation or you're getting into heavier weights, then we might kind of look at things. But I would say for 90% of the people, we're not really crossing that bridge.
Yeah. So you'd say like basically we're maintaining the bariatric, typical diet, which is the protein forward, making sure we're hitting that throughout the day, getting our blast of protein. And then based on the duration, kind of much like I would tell any of my endurance athletes, as we get across that hour, 60, 90 minutes above, that's where those carbohydrates are going to be really important to start thinking about, where can I get in a little bit of carbohydrate, that 30 to 60 grams per hour, if we're doing durations that are longer. Would you agree? Is that kind of what you would advise as well?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. And I'll probably have more to say too on that. Like this time next year, I'm helping one of my gals. I think she's going to do a 25K ruck. So this will be kind of fun to train for. So
I love it. Good. And, just to back to that. So is the rucking community, and again, I don't know. So that's why I'm asking, like, do they do like races like for time, or is it just kind of a community where we're like, hey, today we're going to do a particular distance? Is there that type of aspect to it? I
think it's still evolving. So there's the one company that I work with is Go Ruck. So I love them. They've kind of, I would say when you look at like rucking equipment, they basically originated with, their founder was like a Green Beret or something. So he was very into like when he got back to the States, like what was that going to look like, and kind of was working on high quality things. So they have big military roots, but they also have a lot of events. And I think that that's how their company has grown so much, but I see a lot of other companies too. So I think that like some of the cult following kind of follows like specific brands, but I also see where, like even at the bariatric retreat last year, like I rucked it with, I think we had like 5 of us rucking at the 5K. And so I see a lot of times where people see a 5K, a 10K, and they're like, I'm going to ruck that. So maybe, running is out of the equation, or they just don't like to run. That would be me. So I feel like I'm going to ruck it. Like you still get a good challenge. You can still kind of have those PRs and those push paces and kind of have specific goals too. If you feel like, okay, maybe I'm kind of between walking and running. I don't know what I want to do. And I would say you could try rucking. So
I love that. That's a great option. No, I didn't think about that. That's a really good option.
I will say too, there are certain like rucking specific ones. One is I think it's kind of making a comeback. I think it originated in like the 1900s, but they have the Norwegian foot march. And that one has a weight specific. So you have to start with, I can't remember the exact weight, 20 or 30 pounds, and you have to make a certain pace for X amount of mileage. Oh. So there are more endurance events like that. Some of them are pretty hardcore. So yeah, they're out there if you can find them. I have a feeling we'll probably see more of those in the future.
I'm excited about this. Like seriously, this totally piques my interest. And now, when you find someone like online that you've never heard, and then you're like, oh, this person's cool. And you like go on their Instagram, you're like, oh my God, I'm totally into their content or whatever. And you get hooked. Now I feel like that with rucking. I'm like, this is really cool. And what a kind of a nice, just a different option just to mix things up. And when someone's looking for a new challenge, I think it's a really cool thing.
And I would say, I like to say it's strength training for the people who really maybe prefer cardio. So if you're
Sure.
always, on the elliptical or, doing something that's got more weight bearing aspect, it definitely doesn't replace strength training. But then I think for someone like me, like I really don't love like the treadmill or the elliptical. I'm like, I'm going to ruck. Like that's going to be my cardio. So
Yeah.
I think it kind of has benefits on both sides.
Love it. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing all that. Cause for me personally, I don't know much about it. So I'm very interested in it.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit more, just specific nutrition stuff. What are some of the biggest bariatric myths that like to address or dispel that maybe you see commonly with your own clients or, in the social media, world? What are some of those things that you are like, hey, let's address these?
Yeah. I would say kind of bariatric specific, I see a lot of like extremely low calorie recommendations. I think that's one thing, especially that, I think sometimes it maybe follows surgeons or follows certain clinics, but, maybe it's 800 to 1,000 calories a day that you think you need to eat for life. And that is just not realistic. I like to think that at a certain point, like I'm going to air quote here, that you have to learn to eat like a normal person again. And that takes time because as your portions grow, that's totally normal. So I see a lot of fear there where people oftentimes when I start working with them are maybe under eating or they're grazing all day because they're trying to restrict, but then, you're eating kind of low calorie foods, spiking your blood sugar, and you just get on this, again, roller coaster all day. So I think the low calorie recommendation itself, especially if it's coupled with something like low fat, I feel like you're almost forced into this corner where you're eating primarily high protein, high carbs. And we know that fat can be really beneficial for like helping you feel satisfied, good for blood sugar. And you kind of, again, can prevent that roller coaster. But I will say too, volume. I know there's almost like information overload out there. So I feel like anyone who maybe doesn't have that support from their surgical clinic, it's overwhelming. So
Totally. Yeah.
yeah.
I agree with you. And I was going to say, on the flip side, something that I'm seeing more and more that I'm kind of having to address is people overdoing it on protein that are. So for example, I'm kind of running into this with, okay, so I want to gain muscle. I've had bariatric surgery, right? So overall my intake is, as compared to someone who hasn't, is somewhat reduced, right? And so when I'm working with folks, we have, bariatric nutrition guidelines, we have sports nutrition guidelines, and we are merging those two best to fit you, and your tolerance and your goals, et cetera. And what I have been coming across more often than not is people overdoing it on protein and almost to the point where they're ignoring their tool because someone gave them some arbitrary, high protein amount, and they're actually forcing down almost way too much. And, in my experience of just especially with folks that have specific muscle gaining goals, what I have seen is that yes, the 60 to 80 grams that most folks are, starting with after surgery, yeah, probably inadequate in terms of, for goals for muscle. But also on the flip side, eating, 2 gram per pound or even 1.5 gram per pound is, and I'll just go even to 1 gram per pound for some people, it might be too much. And so what I have found is that working with folks where we start with where you're at, we start making gradual increases based on how much you can tolerate, right? Because we can do all the calculations in the world, you and I, right? And if people can't tolerate it, they can't tolerate it. But I guess my thought is I've just been seeing overcompensation on protein, and now they're not even taking in adequate carbohydrates, fats, et cetera, because they're overdoing it on protein. So that's kind of something that I've been seeing more recently that I've been kind of trying to get folks to listen, you may have this range for protein, but we don't need to go to the top of the range first. Let's start at the lower end of this recommended range, and we can build up and see how much is enough for you. And then that's it. You don't have to, hit this high number just to hit it. I don't know. Right. Have you seen that too?
Oh, I see that all the time. Yeah, I think we think that more is better, but I think you get to that point where you're eating so much protein, you're displacing other things like fiber. It's like when you're eating high protein, it's like you're wondering why you can't poop. It's because you're not eating enough carbs and fiber. So I think that's a big thing. And especially what we know about like things like gut health and how that interacts with, everything, immune system, brain health, all of those conditions. I think that just, appreciating fiber a little bit more, some of those healthy fats. So I'm a big proponent believing that every macronutrient is important for, maybe different reasons.
Yeah, I totally agree. And to second that with, because we of course we're focused on protein for someone that's had bariatric surgery. Of course, like, yes, we agree that that's important, but it's just at some point you have to make sure that you're balancing in the other nutrients, like you're saying, because they each have purposes, right? Heart healthy fats and carbohydrates, especially for someone that's wanting to do more movement. You do have to have some carbohydrates. So we can't just go all protein all the time, and I agree with you on the constipation. I see that all the time, especially when folks are doing 2-3 shakes a day. It's like, oh, I'm constipated. It's like, well, let me hear if this happens to you. I get folks that are doing, 2 or 3 protein shakes because, they're trying to hit some high number, and then they're still hungry because the shakes don't really make them feel that full. And then they're kind of battling like, well, now I don't want to eat, other things because I've already hit this X amount of protein. I don't know. Do you see that?
Yeah, I definitely see when protein goals are too high. I think you can't do it without a lot of protein products like powders and bars and things like that. So you almost like tip the scale towards some of those processed foods just because they're higher in protein versus doing something like eggs or beef or chicken, like things like that, for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. And let me ask you this. So when you are seeing someone that's in a weight loss stall or a plateau, what are some of the things that you recommend to your folks that are kind of going through that?
That's a good question. I would say the first thing I look for is grazing. So if you're kind of eating every couple hours, I would say that's one of the number one factors that we see for things like regain, especially after, bariatric surgery, is like, if you're kind of grazing all day, you're not really getting that satisfaction. If you're not getting, even experimenting with a little bit more volume at once or more protein. So that's usually number one. I would say number two, I'm looking at, again, those things that we can't really see, like stress and sleep. And I think we underestimate how much that can impact everything. I have one client, she's like, once I started to revolve my routines and habits around sleep, she's like, it was a game changer. She's like, I snacked a lot less. I had energy to work out. I wasn't cranky and short tempered with my kids and my spouse. And I feel like everything she's like, it's amazing. Once you revolve your things around sleep and you get good rest, you can be human again.
Yeah, totally. I know. And I've seen too with alcohol at night for some clients that are like, it's not a big deal. I just have my 1 glass of wine. And I'm like, as much as there's no judgment, hey, okay. But it does impact sleep, like you're saying. And so when we're having alcohol before bed, then we're not getting into that REM sleep, and that can impact then how you're feeling the next day. I also see that it runs, of course, besides the fact that it in itself has calories, it then stimulates appetite too. For a lot of folks, they're kind of, okay, I have some drink and I'm just relaxing. What can I just kind of munch on? And I have seen that to contribute too, especially at nighttime. And one thing, I don't know if this is something that you have recommended, I have found that if I can get folks to eat a little bit more solid sources of protein and, pairing that with fiber and, heart healthy fats in the first part of the day, particularly, just because most folks are eating, an adequate amount of food at dinner time. I have found that for folks that are in a plateau, oftentimes if we just kind of flip the script a little bit and look at, are you eating adequately in the first part of your day? Are you getting protein at breakfast, an adequate amount? Or are you, having your cup of coffee with maybe just some protein in it and running out, and now you don't eat again till 1, and now you're starving the rest of the day because you exercised in the morning and your body's like, hey, I'm hungry. I don't know. Is that something that you have seen as well?
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, looking at if you're not hungry in the morning, are we having too much at night? So I feel like sometimes you get into that vicious cycle too, if you tend to be more of a nighttime snacker. Yeah. Again, another reason I love CGM, because we can see okay, if you, eat XYZ before bed, what is that doing to your sleep overnight? Or like you said, things like alcohol, I can see, sometimes depending on what that is, it can tank your blood sugar, it can raise your blood sugar. Right. And then that kind of sends you to sleep with, not optimal levels. Or I've seen it even, personally in my Oura ring, it's 1 glass of wine will be elevated heart rate, you're not getting some of that rest that you need. And then that kind of plays into, even more snackiness the next day when you're not getting that rest.
Yeah, totally. And I'll just say lastly too, and this will go with rucking, I have seen that for folks that just aren't adequately, fueling around a workout, whether it's rucking, whether it's just going to the gym, whether it's, whatever it is that you're doing, I have found that for folks that are trying to get out of plateau, they're like, I don't understand. I'm exercising so much. I'm moving my body. And I'll be like, well, here's the thing. How do you feel in the workout? Well, but I'm so tired. And it's like, if we aren't fueling properly, when you go to the gym or you go to do your rucking, you can't really get the most out of the workout because you're tired because you're not fueling properly, right? And so timing, eating around, your workouts or planning your meals around your workouts can be a really helpful strategy as well, I've found.
For sure. Like you said, if you're not getting the max benefit of that workout, not saying that every day is going to be a great workout, but I think if you're going in well fueled and you perform better, that's a huge net positive for having, say, something beforehand, for sure.
Yeah. Totally agree. Okay, so last question. Any last advice that you would like to give, that for someone that's maybe wanting to just improve their nutrition after bariatric surgery? You have any advice?
Yes. I think I'll kind of circle back to something I said earlier is just if you feel like you're struggling or stuck, I think, again, you try to do all that research on Instagram or social media or Google the best diet. It's completely overwhelming. So I think having tunnel vision a little bit, whether it's, focusing on, if it's clinic recommendations, if you have a good relationship with them and trust your clinic. Otherwise, there's lots of folks out there like him or me. And I think just finding those people that you jive with or really like their messaging. So maybe it involves unfollowing some people or, just adding a few people to your favorites and, kind of trying to tame back some of the noise. It feels like you're kind of drinking from a water hose sometimes. But I think ultimately, there is no one size fits all, which makes it so difficult, especially as you get further out from surgery and, maybe you have like performance goals. And that's where, someone like him, I think you come in and it's like, that's not a framework that anyone is taught. Even as dietitians, we don't get that education, what you're doing for merging or, I think a lot of the clinic recommendations that support drops off. And then, now I have this performance goal and I don't know what to do with it or how to fuel. So I think, again, just kind of putting on tunnel vision and just really kind of thinking about things from a curiosity point of view, like more experimenting versus being judgmental, like starting over again and, doing this. It's like, okay, well, what can you glean or learn from that, experiment versus like being so hard on yourself too, because I think we have, it's natural to criticize yourself, but if we can kind of be a little bit more curious about how we can tweak it a little bit next time, I think that just really helps things long term.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's great advice. I think that's fantastic. And where can folks follow you or learn more about how to work with you?
Yeah. So I'm at Kayla Girgen RD on all the things. I would say I'm most active on Instagram. And then you can always check out my website too, kaylagirgenrd.com. I just launched a 30-day blood sugar and strength boot camp. So it talks a little bit more, just kind of going through some of those foundational, I would say mindset things, but then also some of those blood sugar basics too, and just kind of more step by step. And then I also have my kind of women's bariatric group too, if you're looking for kind of longer term support. So we have book club, things like that tonight. So little different community events that we're doing all the time.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I so appreciate it. I always love talking to you too. And I love, the areas that you are an expert in. I'm always, like I said, when I was like, I want to talk to you. Can you come on my podcast? Because I want to learn more about rucking and continuous glucose monitoring, both of which I, don't know much about. So I appreciate your expertise. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. I love it when like your research is like me search where it's like, okay, I just want to learn all of this, but
totally.
Yes, it was a pleasure. I always like enjoy collaborating with you and really appreciate what you're doing for the community.
Oh, right back at you. Thank you. Awesome. Well, you guys, please give Kayla a follow online, and I will post all of your social media and your website on the show notes so that people can just click easily and go right there to learn more about Kayla and how to work with her. And just as a reminder, you can watch the full video of this podcast episode on my YouTube channel, the Active Bariatric Nutrition channel. So make sure to subscribe to it. Give it a like if you don't mind. And if you wouldn't mind just sharing this with one person that you think would find this episode helpful or any other of the past episodes, I would so greatly appreciate it, because the goal of this podcast is just to help as many folks as we can on their journey and try to help provide evidence-backed information from experts in the field. So please, if you don't mind doing that and give the show a comment or a rating, that would be great as well. And you can follow me on my social media, which is on Instagram, Active Bariatric, also my Facebook group and my TikTok channels. And if you'd like to learn more about my one-to-one bariatric nutrition coaching services, you can go to my website, which is activebariatricnutrition.com, and feel free to schedule a discovery call so we can learn more about each other. So again, thank you so much for your time today, Kayla. We really appreciate it. And we'll do this again next week. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.